want to start with something that you already know. You already know this. There are a lot of people who are very anxious. There are a lot of people who are very busy. And there are a lot of people who are very tired. Can I get an amen to all of that? Yes. And guess what? I'm one of those people. I'm not afraid to admit it. I am one of those people. I am very busy. I'm in such a hurry. I'm one of those people that when you pull up to the traffic light, if one lane is really long and I'm in that lane, then I just jump over to the next lane. You know, I'm always trying to get ahead in Utah traffic because it's a nightmare out there, everybody. Be safe. But I'm the guy that's always jumping lanes, just trying to get ahead. Sometimes, this is kind of how tired I can be sometimes. I'll get home from work at the end of a long day in the office, and before I can engage with my wife and our kiddos, I just tell them, hey guys, Dad just needs a 10-minute refuel. I just need a quick cat nap, you know, and I just close my eyes and I zonk out, set the alarm. 10 minutes later, I'm up, I'm ready to go. But like, I'm at the age where I can nap whenever, wherever, you know. That's how old I am, and I'm just kind of tired these days. And here's another one. I'm a bit anxious as well. Like sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., trying to solve all the world's problems like a superhero in the dark, you know, like, and I have all these thoughts about how things are going wrong and all these problems that I could fix, and I wake up at 2 a.m. trying to solve it. That's called anxiety. Anybody else ever tried to solve the world's problems at 2 a.m. and then you struggle to go back to sleep after that? Like, that's my life. And it turns out when you wake up at 9 a.m. and get in the office, those problems aren't so scary anymore, you know? But I feel all of those things at times. I feel tired, I feel busy, I feel anxious, and I don't want to feel that. I don't desire any of that. And I would guess if you can relate at all, you don't want to feel any of that, which is why what we're studying today in Hebrews chapter 4 is so compelling. Regardless of what you believe, regardless of where you are at with Jesus, regardless of where you are on your spiritual journey, the invitation of Hebrews 4 is intriguing. Rest, rest, rest. Let me read it to you again. Hebrews 4, verse 1. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, it still stands. Meaning, rest in God is available to you. You haven't missed it yet. It's not going away yet. God extends it to you now. It hasn't passed by. His invitation to rest in him, it still stands. And so we are going to talk about it today. And if you've wrestled with some tiredness, some busyness, or some anxiousness, like this message is for you. We are going to explore today how to experience it. So we've been in a series called Just Jesus. And at the heart of this series, we just want to talk about who Jesus is, just him. Religion, church, it can be complicated, it can be difficult, it can be messy, there can be barriers, there can be hurdles, all standing in the way of you just walking with Jesus. And so we wanted to try and clear those out of the way so that you would just see Jesus for who he is and see him as someone who is offering you rest at the deepest level. That's what we're going to explore today. But before we get there, I thought we would just explore the problem a little bit more first, so we're ready for the solution. I wanted to explore the problem of anxiousness, busyness, and tiredness for a moment. And they actually all fit together in this weird cycle of anxiety, busyness, tiredness. Here's how I think they fit together. Anxiety forces busyness, which produces tiredness, which causes more anxiety. You ever been on this crazy merry-go-round before? You're worried, you're concerned about things, you're seeing things, and you're like, someone should do something about that. Well, maybe I should get busy trying to fix all of that. And then because we're so busy, trying to do so much, we just find ourselves so tired. And then we're like, I can't get to all the problems I wanted to get to, so now I'm all the more anxious. This is a crazy cycle. Today I want to talk about how to get off of it. But first, let's break down anxiousness, busyness, tiredness a little bit more. I came up with a list of things that produce those realities for us. What makes us anxious? Number one, identity issues. I think this might be at the heart of it. Your identity is your sense of self. It's your sense of worth. It's the answer to the question, who am I? Your identity is the story you tell yourself about yourself. And in our day and age, a lot of people are trying to figure all of that out. And as they work on that, it's really stressful. It can produce a lot of worry. It can produce a lot of fear. The feeling of not measuring up or not good enough. Or I don't know who I am. Or I will try a whole bunch of different identities, trying to find one that fits me. It's exhausting. It produces anxiety. So what makes us anxious? Identity issues, isolation, just being alone, not being in community can cause us to worry about things and fear things. That in community, are just not that fearful. Our community can encourage us and build us up, and if we don't have it, it just feeds into isolation and anxiousness all the more. What makes us anxious? Technology. Have you guys seen the stats on like mental health disorders and issues in teens and young adults? It's off the charts with the rise of technology, social media, smartphones. It's crazy because technology is always pushing something, and it's saying you don't have what you need, which only feeds more anxiety. What else? Pain. If you're hurting physically, relationally, emotionally, if you've experienced some pain, it can create more anxiety. And here's one more, lack of belief in God. I'll circle back to that one in a moment. Well, then what keeps us busy? Well, of course, trying to fix anxiety. That seems to make sense, right? If I could just fix all the stuff I'm worried about, things would be good. Now I'm really busy trying to fix so many things that perhaps I can't fix. What else keeps us busy? It's popular. You know, I haven't talked to somebody in a long time where I said this to them, hey, how you been? And they're like, you know what? I just got so much time on my hands, I don't know what to do. I've not heard that in a while. What I usually hear is we're good, but we're busy. We're good, but things are so busy. Being busy, it is popular. What else keeps us busy? Options. Options keep us busy. There is so much that you could do. So many places you could be today, and you chose to be here. I'm encouraged by that. But there's a lot of options. Options keep you busy. FOMO keeps you busy. Do you guys know what FOMO is? It's the fear of missing out. So-and-so's doing this. The neighbors bought that. I probably should do that. I don't want to miss out on anything. Because I don't want to miss out, well, I stay busy trying to enjoy all the things. Lies of satisfaction, that keeps us busy. If I had more of this, if I did this a little bit more, if I could get rid of this, I'd be more satisfied. And that keeps us busy. And then other people keep us busy. The kids need us, the in-laws need us, our parents need us, our coworkers need us, whatever. So people, they keep us busy. And all of this feeds into the feeling of tiredness. Well, what makes us tired? Of course, anxious thoughts, trying to justify my own existence. That'll keep you tired, keep you exhausted. Keeping up with others, disordered loves, as St. Augustine called it. That it's not that we're loving the wrong things, but we love them in the wrong order. That can keep us tired. And then belief in a random universe. Belief in a random universe. Well, that can produce a tiredness. And here's what I mean. Essentially, if you walk away from trust in a sovereign God, one who is eternal, who made it all, who sustains it all, who is redeeming it all, who will call time someday on all things, if you walk away from a God like that, functionally, you are left to play God in this life, trying to hold all things together yourself, trying to be all things to all people yourself, trying to rescue people, save people, fix yourself, all at the same time carrying your own pain from what you've been through while trying to fight the lies technology is peddling to you. If you try to play God in this life, you will be anxious, busy, and exhausted, I promise. But if you can step back and trust that there is one above it all, in it all, holding it all together, you are on your way to rest. So let me give you the solution to the crazy cycle of anxiety, producing busyness, producing tiredness. It's all about Jesus. Here's the solution, then we'll see it in the text. Here we go. Jesus is already God, which frees us from the busyness of playing God, which produces a rest in God, which causes more trust in God. Because as we rest in him, we see that he's for us. Every one of his instructions to us is in our best interest. And as I trust in God, it only deepens our rest in God. That is what I want you to see today, so that you might walk out of here with all that you have going on, all that's keeping you busy, tired, and perhaps anxious, and just take a deep breath, enjoy singing to God with his people. Walk out of here knowing he holds it together, he justifies your life. There's nothing you could do to cause him to value you more. He knows exactly what is going on. So we can take a breath, walk out of here, and experience rest in 3 types of ways. A little bit of rest daily, a day of rest weekly, and all of that pointing to rest eternally. That is what Hebrews is getting us to. So let's take a peek at it. Hebrews 4. You heard it read earlier, but let's go through it again and break it down. Hebrews 4, picking it up in verse 1 and 2. Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, it's still an offer on the table, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For if we also have had the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them, because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. Now, I got to get you into the story here. If you haven't been with us, you've missed a little bit, but here's the historical background of the book of Hebrews. There are Christians in the first century who came out of religion. They came out of Judaism. They took a step to Jesus, a step towards grace, a step out of this thing called the law that they were in, and they had found Jesus as the one who fulfilled all of it, and all of it culminates in him. Now, persecution is starting to heat up. It's getting difficult to be a Jesus follower in the first century. And so they are considering turning back to what they came from. Jesus plus our old traditions, Jesus plus some of my works is probably what keeps me saved. Jesus plus some of the worship in this system that we came from. And we've discovered it's Jesus plus nothing is everything. I mean, that's what he's driving at, the author of Hebrews. We don't know who the author of Hebrews is. He was a leader in the first century, a pastor over a group of people who put together this message, and it was shared. He remains anonymous because perhaps he didn't need to get the credit for it. Perhaps it wasn't meant to be a letter at all. It was probably a sermon preached to a crowd. All right, and so he remains anonymous, trying to help these people not drift away from Jesus, go back to religion, because you can't go back. You can't sew up the veil that was torn. You can't break down the door because it's been shut, okay? And so this is what's happening in the letter itself. Now, when we get to this idea in chapter 4 of they, remember the author of Hebrews is uploading a story of a group of people. They are the they, okay? And if you weren't here last week, you missed the background to it. But the they is Old Testament Israel in a very specific situation and scenario, okay? They had just come out of slavery in Egypt. Remember, God had made a promise to Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob that this group of people would enter into an incredible land. They would rest in that promised land. This is the idea of rest from this story, although rest is really bigger and connected to all of our stories. They were to rest in the land. They were to be a culture that would draw all people to the God of the Bible, to Yahweh, because they would be a culture that is thriving under his goodness. They were to be a light to the world. So God brings them out of Egypt and brings them to the edge of the promised land, the land of Canaan, and they are about to enter in. Unfortunately, though, they get pretty scared about entering in, because there in the land, there are some big, bad, scary dudes, and they don't want to enter. And God's like, I've been with you. You saw what I did with the Red Sea, how I led you, and smoke and fire. I mean, miraculous signs and wonders they saw. They get to the edge. They're about to enter into the promised land, and they tremble in fear, and they refuse to trust. And they disobey. And the consequence of their disobedience is that they would not enter into the rest. They came all of this way, but they fell short of that rest. And the author of Hebrews is saying, don't be like them. By going back, you are failing to enter rest. You are falling short. You are coming up short. Now, the idea of coming up short, it's a difficult feeling. When I first read this, I thought of it in golf terms. I don't know if there's any golfers in the room. Golfers in the room, you ever hit a birdie putt and it is tracking, and it is online? If you're not a golfer, you're like, oh, brother. But if you're a golfer, you're like, oh, I get this feeling immensely to my bones. When that putt comes up short and you had the line, there is nothing more infuriating than that. We were so close. The author of Hebrews is saying, guys, please continue in your trust, because the trust is rest. The trust is rest. And if you go back, you will have fallen short of it. You will not enter into God's rest. Now, when we think about rest, and we obviously want that. That sounds good. I think all of us desire rest. Here's the catch when it comes to rest. I think you know this already, but there's a catch that can be difficult. Rest and trust go together. Trust and rest, they fit together, okay? Because if you are going to rest, you have to trust that you're safe. You have to trust that it is okay to let your guard down. You have to trust someone or something. And we all know this. Trust is incredibly difficult. Trusting yourself into the care of another does not come natural to most of us. Let me explain it like this. In the Nelson household, I have a reputation these days. The reputation for booking the sleaziest motel in town when we travel. That's my new reputation. Talk to my kids about it. They're like, Dad, you did it again. All right? I always am booking the worst hotels. I'm a little cheap. I've come up with a rule, though, for myself. Here's the rule. If there's a number in the name, you don't want to remain. All right? That's... quote that. Put it on a bumper sticker. You're like, that's the one thing I learned in church today. If there's a number in the name, you don't want to remain. Motel 6, Super 8, steer clear, all right? Now, last year, we were on a mountain bike trip. Nora was racing, and we were outside of town, up in the Logan area, and we booked a hotel, sleazy. There was a number in the name. And that night, I struggled to rest because I was constantly looking out the curtain to see if there's anybody looking in at us. I was looking out the curtain to see if the car was safe. I was jangling the little chain at the front door to make sure it wasn't broken. I was like looking through the peephole trying to find like secret cameras. Like I could not rest in this place, all right? There was hair in the sink. It did not smell good, okay? I didn't feel safe. I couldn't trust the place, and therefore I struggled to sleep. I struggled to rest. This is because trust and rest go together. Listen, if you are going to rest in God, you will need to be able to trust Him. You will need to do the hard work to investigate whether there's evidence that He is trustworthy, that He will come through on His promises, that He's done what He said He's done in history, that He is who He says He is. Because if you cannot trust, you will not rest. But Hebrews 4 is driving at something very important. Rest is extended to you, but you have to trust to enjoy it. And in the Old Testament, that group of people, they didn't trust, they didn't enter into rest. And so too, if you don't want to trust God, you will not experience rest in God. We're going to see that theme emerge. They fit together. And so, if we are going to be people who enjoy rest, we should do what verse 1 says. We must be careful. You could write it down like this. A restful life is a careful life. Because if you rest in the wrong thing, if you rest in something not trustworthy, it will get you eventually. You must be careful in your rest. Kicking up your feet to watch the game, that can be restful, but it doesn't drive rest into the deepest parts of our lives. A little bit of self-care with the girls, it can be restful, but it might not drive that rest into the deepest parts of our lives, the parts of our lives that were on that list for anxiety, busyness, and tiredness. And I can prove it. You ever got back from a vacation and someone said to you, how was the vacation? And you're like, it was great, but I'm so tired, I need a vacation from my vacation. Have you ever heard that before? That is someone who thought they were resting, but they actually were very busy trying to enjoy their vacation. And it produced a tiredness. It didn't really create a rest. So you can engage in fun hobbies, activities, but not find rest at the deepest level. Why? Because the rest that we're talking about, biblically speaking, is a little bit daily, one day weekly, all pointing to rest eternally. Let's get back into Hebrews and look at it. Picking it up now in verse 3. Now we who have believed entered that rest. The idea is that entering the rest happens when you believe, happens when you trust, okay? Just as God has said, so I decided on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. And yet his works have been finished since the creation of the world. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in these words. On the seventh day, God rested from all his works. Okay, what's happening here? Well, the author of Hebrews is quoting an Old Testament passage from the book of Psalms that really summarizes God's approach to Israel when they failed to enter the land. Remember, he's just uploading the story. It would have been on repeat. It would have been automatic for them. Like if I were to sing a lyric of a song in this place, a song we all knew, you could fill in the rest of the song. By quoting this, he's filling in the rest of the story. That story can be found in Deuteronomy 1, Numbers 12, Numbers 13, Old Testament passages. And what we see is that God was angry with them. And let me tell you why anger is a good thing. Anger is a secondary emotion, and it is a response to someone doing something that's harmful, something that hurts. Something that is not in their best interest, something that is not good for them. God's anger is righteous anger. He doesn't fly off the handle. He is not erratic. He is not enraged. It is his response to something that he does not like. And what is it that he does not like? The fact that this group of people would not trust him. Trusting them is in their best interest. He loves them so much. He doesn't need something from them. He wants something for them. And they rejected it. And they were judged because of it. So this is what's happening here in this moment, talking about what it was like for those people to have hard hearts, refusing to trust. And then the author does something that's brilliant. He pulls it out of Israel's story, and he puts it into Genesis, which is all of human history. The book of Genesis is our origin story. And in Genesis chapter 2, we see God rest after his work of creation. which is really interesting. Let me read a little more, and then we'll unpack this idea of the Sabbath, okay? Verse 5, and again in the passage above, he says, they shall never enter my rest. Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of their disobedience, let me just make it really clear. Let me underline this. Rest and trust go together. Disobedience means no rest. To experience his rest, it will require obedience. We will have to live his way. And part of that is choosing to cease from our labor and to enjoy him and rest. We'll see it all come together in a moment. Picking it up in verse 7, God again set a certain day, calling it today. This he did when a long time later he spoke through David, as in the passage already quoted. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. So although this story that he's pulling from happened in the Old Testament, it is as relevant today as you could imagine. In the first century for the Hebrews, and in this century for us, okay? For if Joshua had given them rest, Joshua was one of the leaders for that group of people. He would actually bring a different group into the land. God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Now, the word in Hebrew, which is what the book of Genesis is the language of the book of Genesis, for rest is the word Sabbath or Shabbat. And in English, we've just lifted that word and we just say it the same way. And if you've spent any time in religion, surely you've heard of the idea of a Sabbath. And I'm not sure how you interpreted Sabbath or how it was taught to you. But for many people, it's taught as a bunch of the rules you can't break on a certain day of the week, okay? Here are the rules, here are the boxes you have to check. And if you don't check the boxes or if you break the rules, something bad is going to happen to you. God is getting you to teach you a lesson, and you should keep the Sabbath better next time. Which, if you grew up around that, does not sound very restful. Sounds very stressful, okay? The idea of Sabbath is not that. It's bigger than that. It's better than that. In Genesis chapter 2, after God had created the world in 7 days, now scholars discuss whether those 7 days were 24-hour days, kind of literal days as we think of them, or eras of time. Scholars dispute that, and I have my thoughts for another day. But we get to the end of it, and God rests, which is interesting, because God is never tired. God is omnipotent. He is all-powerful. The most arduous thing we could ever think of does not even suck 1 ounce of energy away from him. So why did he rest? Well, to describe and to show us a pattern that he built into his creation. He built something into creation, for creation, into humanity, for humanity, that we would be people who rest, okay? Now, fast forward a little bit. In agricultural societies where slavery was forced, what Israel experienced in Egypt even, in those societies, there was not a single day off. There was not. You worked sun up to sundown. You worked to the bone. It didn't matter if you died. You worked. Because if you stopped working, another culture would get ahead. If you stopped working, someone would attack you and conquer you. You could never take your eye off the ball. You could never rest. Rest would be the most scary thing imaginable, okay? Because either your owner would get you, or the enemy would get you, or the elements would get you, okay? Now, if you think about this, God then brings them out of slavery and says, would you rest? It's actually one of the 10 Commandments, the 4th. Do you know how scary that would have been? God, you know that no one else rests, right? God, if we take a day to recharge and to enjoy you and remember you, someone is going to get us. God says, I'd like you to rest. It was unheard of. Now, in our day and age where we get 2 days off, Saturday and Sunday, and people work from home and sort of don't maybe get 3 days off a week, right? Work a half day, call it a full day. We're like, 1 day, man, that seems tough on them, Imagine what it would have been like to be commanded to take a day off when for hundreds of years you never got a moment to rest. It's an incredible gift, isn't it? Now, fast forward to the first century, the Pharisees, who were pros at keeping laws, made this idea of rest into something it was never intended to be. They came up with 39 prohibitions, each with their own set of details, so really hundreds and hundreds of instruction around what you could do and couldn't do on the Sabbath, what you could carry, what you could cook, how far you could go, how far you could travel. It was crazy. And Jesus is dealing with this in the Gospels. And at one point, he says, listen, everybody. The Sabbath is for you. It's not you for the Sabbath. And by saying that, he introduced something brand new into a group of people who had lost the big picture of what it means to trust and rest. And so to a group of exhausted people from trying to keep the law and trying to keep up with everything going on, in Matthew 11, Jesus says this. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. A yoke was a farming tool that would go over two animals as they would plow through a field. And so by putting a yoke on another, you were with them. You were going to do what they were going to do. And Jesus is saying this, I have instruction for you. Learn from me as a disciple. Obey me. Trust me. These are the same themes from Hebrews 4. But listen, as you trust me, it will be light, it will be easy, it will be restful because I made you. I know what's best for you. And in this sense, what Jesus instructs of us, it's not a have to, it's a get to, but it's a get to that leads to deep rest. And so, of course, it becomes a want to. It is our pleasure to obey Jesus because every step of obedience produces a byproduct of delight, really the byproduct of rest. And so by teaching in this way, Jesus is saying this. You've heard about Sabbath as one day a week, but let me tell you, I want you to cease forever from striving to obtain or labor for my favor, my love, or your salvation. Would you just rest in it now? Wow. That's what he's teaching. And so he's inviting us in to eternal rest in him. That is what Hebrews is describing, a Sabbath day for the soul, a Sabbath day that lasts forever. No more striving or laboring to obtain God's favor, simply trusting in it. So I wanted to write it as personally as I knew how. I wanted to read it to you. Jesus wants you to know this personally. I run the universe. Nothing is outside of my sovereign will. Whew. Okay, thank you. Jesus, you see all things? You're seeing what I'm seeing? Yeah, I'm seeing it. Okay, good. I trust that you could do more than I could ever do. Anxiety starts to dial back a little bit. Jesus wants you to know this personally. I justify your worth. Nothing you do makes you more valuable to me. If you're going to choose, because of wisdom, to take one day a week to not produce and not create, you will start to wonder if you're falling behind. You will start to wonder if you're missing out on a paycheck or some type of accolade, if you're missing out on something. But by saying, Jesus, my value is found in you, I'm going to take a day off to honor you. It will be, even to this day, rather scary, I think, for most of us. But it's worth it, knowing that he justifies my worth. Nothing I do makes me more valuable to him. He wants you to know this. I want you to put me first. Like, take my yoke. I want you to put me first because I love you. I satisfy your desires. You won't miss out with me. I'm asking you to live differently than others. And then lastly, I've created you to have rhythms for people and for pause. Rhythms for people and rhythms for pause. So, once we've entered into his rest eternally, meaning we know we don't have to labor for his love or labor for salvation. It's not after all we can do. It's based on all he has already done, and I just rest in it. After we're sure of that, now there's wisdom in taking a few moments to experience this in ways that look forward to that and remind us of that. And Christians for quite some time have still taken one day during the week and a little bit of time daily to rest in him. And I want to talk about that now as a step of wisdom, not a command. Wisdom around resting inside of the rhythms God has made us with. So 4 restful practices to enjoying that will help us enjoy Christ's rest. Here they go. The first part is to pause. And all these start with P. It's like super pastory, but like it just came out this way, you know? The first one is to pause. Just take a little bit of time, whether it's one day during the week or a little bit of time during one day during the week, and simply pause to refocus. Think about what's true of you, true of Jesus. It's a great way to remind yourself of your need to rest and that God has it all. So that's the pause. Well, what do I do when I pause? It's always good to pray. And when we pray, we bring our concerns to Jesus and we can sort of relabel them. Jesus, I give this to you now. So you're carrying it. I don't have to carry it all. That's like relabeling the heavy thing in our life, you know? It's really helpful. So I'll pause, I'll pray, we'll look at a passage. Look at one passage. And a passage is a truth from God's word that can help us see reality correctly And in that, we are reframing our worldview around what God says is true. And then lastly, purpose, that I can value again my life and my purpose in light of what Jesus has said. So, when those four things are at work, you are on your way to experiencing this type of rest, a little bit daily, or perhaps one day weekly. John Ortberg says this, he's an author. I thought this was helpful. To choose to live an unhurried life in our day is somewhat like taking a vow of poverty in earlier centuries. It is scary. And literally, if what you make, your income, is connected to all that you do, taking a day of rest will mean I make less. I mean, in some ways, this is a countercultural, revolutionary, kind of punk rock thing to do in Utah. Who would do this? It's worth it. It's worth it. Here's what Ortberg says. There are deeper riches on the other side. Deeper riches on the other side. J.P. Moreland also says this. Anxiety is largely a learned habit that can be unlearned through the right practices. J.P. Moreland wrote a book called Finding Quiet, and some of this application here at the end is from his book. You could pick it up. We don't have time today to cover so many facets of anxiety. I'm not really even an expert to begin to talk about it, but we can at least approach it from a biblical point of view. In the book, Moreland talks about the role of medication, and he says the medication is essentially food for the brain, food that the brain cannot produce on its own. I mean, that can be so helpful. I would encourage you to pick up Moreland's book if you want to dive deeper into all of this. So I want to give you a bit of homework, okay? A little bit of homework. Here we go. I'll give it to you, then I'll explain it. The 12-minute challenge. I just want to try something. I just want to give you something to do. I always want you to walk away thinking, there's something I can do with what I've heard today. I want to give you the 12-minute challenge. I recently came across the work of a neuroscientist named Dr. Carolyn Leaf, and she's been studying the effects of spiritual disciplines like prayer and pause and passage on the brain. And she's a neuroscientist, which means she's an expert in studying neuroplasticity. It's how the brain is transformed through the major experiences of a person's life. The brain can change over time with behaviors that are a part of someone's experience over time. And so she studied the effects of prayer and passage and pause on someone's brain, 12 minutes a day for 8 weeks. And that became a changed person. That became a habit. A habit is something that happens like unconsciously, that is shaping who we are becoming. I would love for you to have the habit of pause, passage, prayer, purpose. Not only does science say it will make you a person who has more peace, it's absolutely what the Bible has been saying for thousands of years too. Hebrews 4 wraps up with verse 13 and 14. I want to give you 13, we'll be done. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. God is watching how well you are resting. I think a lot of people think they'll get to the pearly gates at the end and you'll have to give an account of all that you did for God, all that you didn't do that was so bad. God, look at everything I accomplished, everything I built, look at all my accolades. And I think what we're going to have to give an account for, it's funny that this message of account comes right after an incredible section on rest, is an account of how you rested. And so may you be a person who rests for a bit of time daily. May you be a person who rests one day weekly. But ultimately, all of that is pointing us to this. Would you be a person who rests eternally in Jesus? Let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you for your clear teaching on this. It's so fascinating to me that in basically every generation, throughout all of human history, people have been anxious, busy, and tired. And we still are. Probably because we just haven't applied what you said. So we want to do that. In the deepest parts of our lives, if we see our life on that list from earlier, would you apply your truth into those areas? That Jesus, we would see that you are already God. We don't need to play God. Jesus, we would see that you've already saved us the moment we trust you. So we don't need to continue striving to justify and save ourselves. And then Jesus, would we see that what you invite us into, the life you invite us to live, is in our best interest. So may we take your yoke upon ourselves. And in all of that, take a deep breath, enjoy this next moment with you and your people. And even now, get a glimpse of that eternal rest that you bring us into. It's in your name we pray. Amen.